right now, the next 2 months, the next 6 months, the next 12 months, as opposed to thinking about where we might be going with AGI. So let's get into it. To give you a little bit of background on the state of New York, because some of you may have never have heard of the Chief Cyber Officer before, it's because there are no other Chief Cyber Officers in the rest of the country. Governor Kathy Hochul created this position at the beginning of her term as governor to bring an elevated policy focus on cybersecurity to her governor's office. So there's a team of us that sit in the governor's office and we're focused on policy questions and the levers of policy that we can use at the state government level. This is distinct from a number of other states where primarily their senior-most cybersecurity official is their CISO, their Chief Information Security Officer. They're often sitting within an IT agency and have much more operational concerns. New York State has an excellent CISO and CISO team. We also have great teams at the Division of Homeland Security and Emergency Services and at our New York State Police. But we also have a policy function within the governor's office that focuses on cybersecurity. We have a number of levers at our disposal. We do regulations, so we think about regulating critical infrastructure like hospitals, water and wastewater, energy utilities, to make sure that there is a standard cybersecurity baseline for them. We also move money. So Governor Hochul has invested over $270 million to strengthen cybersecurity across state and local governments. We work with counties and cities and towns and villages across the state to provide them with resources that they may not otherwise have access to. All that to say, New York is in a very good position to deal with cybersecurity issues compared to a lot of other states across the country. And we are concerned about some of the impacts of AI on cybersecurity. You think about what that means for New York, where we have a lot of resources at our disposal. Think about what that means for some other states across the country, some other small critical infrastructure utilities that might not have these resources at all. And so what we're thinking about is how do we lift the level for all the folks across the state, but we're also concerned about the security of the rest of our country as well. I want to give you a little bit of context on where cybersecurity world sat maybe 6 months ago, before announcements around Mythos, before announcements around frontier models like ChatGPT 5.5. When you think about the different types of adversaries that are out there are a couple of large nation-state adversaries that we're primarily concerned with: Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, as well as a number of others. They tend to be pretty advanced and mature and have a good amount of resources behind them. They're often looking for political reasons or financial reasons, in the case of North Korea, to disrupt infrastructure in the United States. One of the ways in which they might do this, China in particular, is to embed in critical infrastructure years before an actual conflict might occur. So when we think about incidents, if you've heard of Volt Typhoon or Salt Typhoon or other pre-positioning attacks like that from China, there are a lot of ways in which we want to make sure we can prepare and establish resilience, knowing that the adversary is looking to move now, and we might not find out until a couple of years in the future. One other point to make about this is the convergence of cyber and physical threats. An incident that attacks a hospital now might result in a breach of personally identifiable information or sensitive health information, but it also might disrupt the actual operation of that hospital and make it so that they cannot intake patients via their emergency room. It might mean that nurses and doctors can no longer use their charts to determine what kinds of allergies an individual might have to certain medications. This can lead to real physical impacts that we are concerned about, personal safety impacts that we are concerned about, not just data breaches. If you think about all of the different types of infrastructure across the state of New York, it is incredibly vast, incredibly diverse, and it can affect everything from traffic lights that we see right outside on the street to correctional facilities across the state. So we're thinking about all of the different ways in which a cyber incident might have real-world physical impacts for New Yorkers. The other elements of the threat landscape that I just want to note is the acceleration of cyber criminals and nation-state actors. vectors. The speed at which they are moving is increasing significantly. I believe this comes from a CrowdStrike report from a couple of months ago, where the average breakout time, meaning the time between an intrusion and lateral movement, which would allow an attacker to gain greater control and actually cause some effects, has dropped to 29 minutes. And that is a 65% increase in speed from the year prior. That is a huge change. AI, separate from AI entirely, that is a huge change in terms of the pace and the speed at which our adversaries are moving. When you think about the defenders that we have on our side, it is very hard to move that fast. Even if you have 24/7 operations, even if you have people working around the clock to identify any types of intrusions, patching, remediating, any kind of activity like that takes time. And we are not often in a great position to move as quickly as our adversaries are. That's even before AI. A couple of recent escalations I note here are also ways in which adversaries are explicitly targeting critical infrastructure. So not just looking for a dollar payout necessarily, but might be looking for ways to disrupt our critical infrastructure. Earlier this year, the Hanala hack group attacked Stryker, which is a medical device firm. That affected hospitals across the country. Thankfully, did not cause too many disruptive impacts, but still took down a number of Stryker's operations. In December of last year, there was a Russian cyber attack on Poland's power grid. This was not just a singular attack on one part of the power grid, but it was a multi-staged attack at the same time, hitting multiple entities all at the same time, with the intention, we assume, of taking down their power grid in the middle of winter. And back in 2023, cyber avengers attacked a Pennsylvanian water system. We know that these critical infrastructure sectors are very vulnerable, not just because they are often low resourced, have fewer cybersecurity resources than many private firms, but also because they are reliant on operational technology that is very hard to secure, update, and maintain compared to maybe other types of IT that's easier to update on a regular basis. Last point here, the global cost of cybercrime is increasing. It is forecasted to hit $10.5 trillion in 2026. And for a state or a local government, the cost of an incident like this could exceed over $1.5 million. That's really significant, especially if you're concerned about multiple attacks happening in a year. It's really hard to budget for that, and most entities cannot budget for that. So I just want to set the scene here, why this is important, why these threats are important to us. All of this is table stakes before you even introduce AI and AI-enabled vulnerability scanning, which is what we've seen in the last couple of weeks. Okay, so jumping into the evolution of the threat, the advent of AI. So I'm assuming most of you have heard about Mythos. Probably many of you are familiar with some of the ways in which it is better than previous frontier models. But for those of you that might not be tracking, I'll just lay it out very briefly. Mythos, a model that Anthropic has developed, is significantly better at not only identifying vulnerabilities, but developing the exploits to take advantage of those vulnerabilities as well. It is meaningfully more capable at offensive cyber work. This seems to be somewhat true for Opus 4.6 and 4.7. ChatGPT 5.5 also is very capable. We think that open weight models will catch up within the next 6 to 12 months, although predictions on that timeline vary significantly. But what this means is that adversaries, if they have access to these models, will be able to find vulnerabilities incredibly quickly and probably faster than we can patch. What Anthropic did is they restricted release to Mythos to only a certain set of companies, and there's ongoing debate between Anthropic, the White House, others, about whether they should expand access to other companies at the moment. Anthropic's goal, their stated goal, is to give some advantage to defenders, so that these large companies can take Mythos, target it at their own code bases, improve their systems, push out patches, and make their tools, services, products much more secure and more resilient than they currently are. That has a couple of downstream effects. One is that the vulnerabilities that they're identifying and then patching lead to this potentially huge wave of patches that are hitting every single entity that uses Google products, Microsoft products, any kind of technology tool that you might have a foundation in Mozilla or Google or Microsoft, and you are suddenly going to get hit by hundreds of patches. We've seen this recently, the spike in vulnerabilities, the spike in patches that have been released. That is hard for small entities to intake. It's not impossible necessarily, but it's hard, and it's hard to do that in a sustained manner. It requires a total change in how we think about patch management. That's one of the implications. The other implications is that there are a number of ways in which these frontier models can be used that maybe have not been fully explored yet. They are able to do black box vulnerability discovery. They might be able to reverse patches, reverse engineer patches into working exploits. All of these things are concerning for cyber defenders. It also lowers the bar for attackers. So it makes smart people smarter. And it certainly makes semi-smart people a little bit smarter as well. Moderately skilled attackers can be far more sophisticated. And it brings up low-skilled attackers to moderate. They may not be able to do the most sophisticated, targeted kinds of cyber attacks that we might be most concerned about, but they can certainly add a lot of noise to the space. One of the reasons why this might be concerning is because a lot of the moderately skilled groups, I would consider those to be a lot more of the cybercrime groups, the ransomware groups. They're mostly constrained by their capability, but also time and money. And if this reduces the time and money side of the equation and improves their ability to perpetrate cyber attacks, then all of a sudden they become much more dangerous than we had previously anticipated. For a lot of the very skilled Tier 1 nation-state adversaries, this will certainly change maybe how they approach their work, but there are other constraints on what they do, particularly political constraints that might keep them from deciding to cause a disruptive attack that might lead to a response from the US government. So from my perspective, I'm most concerned about that kind of mid-tier level of cybercrime organizations who might use or leverage these frontier models for their advantage, to be able to move a lot faster. The defense gap I already mentioned. It takes a long time for organizations to even apply a patch. One of the challenges that I was talking to a colleague about earlier is that the most dangerous time in terms of the kind of vulnerability cycle is not when a 0-day is identified and discovered, but often when a patch is released. Because all of a sudden, everybody is now looking at that patch. They're trying to find out from an adversary perspective. An adversary is looking at who has not yet patched. Sometimes patches are not entirely accurate. They may have issues with them, and they might be able to be reverse engineered. So even if there are a lot more 0 days identified, that's a problem in and of itself. But for operational folks, the biggest concern is how fast can we actually manage the fixes that come through? And are we able to do so in a way that's prioritizing the most critical vulnerabilities? Are we able to do this in a way that is fast enough when often patch cycles are 7 days, 14 days, 30 days, as opposed to hours, which is what the adversaries are working on. Okay, last slide here, and then we'll open it up for questions. But the evolution of defense is also something that I'm hopeful about. In the same way that this might make attackers much more risky to our systems, there are ways that we can leverage this if we move fast enough. Frontier models can be incredibly helpful with scanning code. We can integrate it into securing our own code bases. It can be helpful in testing compiled code, identifying bugs, supplementing red teamers and pen testers, reverse engineering malware, and a lot more. The challenge is how do we make sure that we can use this and acquire it and use it fast enough. So the more people that have access to these types of models and using it for cyber defense, I think the better. That's why constraints on some of these models Anthropic, for example, and Project Glasswing, we want as many people on the good side to be able to have access to this as possible for these reasons. We think there's a relatively narrow window of time where the defenders might have an advantage. And if we can use that, all the better. If we wait until open weight models are just as good and anyone can leverage this kind of capability, then we might be in a world of hurt. The other thing that frontier models can do pretty well is help us move away from kind of static access control lists towards systems that learn what normal behavior looks like and can identify anomalies. This is something that the cybersecurity industry has kind of been moving towards for a while. It's part of the kind of zero trust architecture framework that is helpful for a lot of organizations, but we've been slow to implement that, and frontier models can be very helpful with that. As I mentioned before, patch management has to change. One of the interesting but challenging things about frontier models is that it highlights a lot of our own weaknesses. And I'd say only half of those are technical debt. We certainly have a lot of technical debt and technical issues, but a lot of the issues that cyber defenders also face, especially at the government level, are bureaucratic debt issues, I would call them. Structural and governance debt issues, where we have outdated processes that cannot move as quickly as we would like to. That's certainly true on the procurement side, and if anybody wants to talk procurement with me, I'm happy to afterwards. Supply chain transparency. This is incredibly important because most of, I would say 70 to 80% of the work that we do with the state is not dependent on our own code bases, but on third-party vendors. So we are very reliant on these vendors to ensure that their code is secure, that their products are secure, and some of them are not thinking about these challenges either. So we really are pushing our vendors and our third parties to be thinking about the risks and the threats that frontier models pose, and to be using them for their own advantage as well. Lastly, operational resilience. This is not necessarily a new concept. We and many other states push leadership to understand what would it look like if systems go down tomorrow. Nevada actually experienced this last summer when they were hit by a ransomware attack. That resilience piece requires a couple of different things, but the first thing that it requires is an understanding of what are the most critical systems and services. What are the things that New Yorkers rely on a day-to-day basis that are absolutely no-fail? And do we have redundancies in place to make sure that those systems, even if one layer fails, that other layers do not fail? The big unknown, the big unanswered question is what AI will be able to do for defenders tomorrow. Right now, everything that I presented is based on what we know currently about these frontier models and what they can do for us today. But we know that these models are changing so rapidly. So if these models are even 50% better 6 months from now, or 2 times as good at helping us with cybersecurity on the defensive side as they are today, how will that change the industry? We don't really have a good picture of this. And even the companies like Anthropic, OpenAI, and others are struggling to predict what that might look like. They themselves are also finding out the capabilities that their models have as they are testing them. I'm hopeful that we will be able to use the time advantage that we have right now for more defensive purposes, that we are able to patch our systems faster than adversaries can exploit vulnerabilities. But it really takes concentrated effort in the next 2 months, in the next 6 months, in the next 12 months for us to be able to do that well across the board. So for any of you who are working on security issues and want to do more of that, the state is always hiring. For any of you who are able to do that in your own workplaces or on your off time on the side, really encourage you to think about these problems and help provide solutions to them, because we absolutely cannot do this alone. All right, thank you. Happy to take questions.